So patch 15.4 has been out for a couple of days now, and as we said at the beginning of every single video pertaining to this patch, it is a massive fucking patch, and it has so many changes and has affected the meta so heavily that right now, the biggest thing that you gotta know is that this meta is right now heavily reroll centric. I'm sure you've already noticed it in a bunch of your games, but there's a lot of reward for choosing lines that are both rerollable and uncontested. Malzahar, by the way, is also the premier unit of the patch, who is just strong at every single star level. He is rerollable, he is fast 9able, he's easily the most contested unit in high elo at the moment. And while we did talk about it being a reroll meta, 4-cost lines, yes, they have gotten worse because whenever it's a reroll meta, right, stage 3 is going to hit you harder. A lot of the folks who are trying to play reroll are usually more open to sacking stage 2 because they wanted to roll on 3-1 or 3-2 to try and spike and start to build up their tempo from there. That being said, 4-cost lines, yes, they did get worse due to that change, but they're still very playable. They are just really underplayed at the moment just due to reroll disease, and the only condition to play around your 4-cost lines is to just generally play high tempo. As long as you can get to 4-1 without bleeding too much and having a decent amount of economy, you should be able to still play quite a lot of the 4-cost lines that we have seen in previous patches with a decent amount of success. Some 4-cost lines, though, let's be honest, are completely dead though. Bye-bye Yuumi. Yuumi is just not a primary carry anymore. She is just so much worse compared to any other 4-cost line at the moment. Another thing to note, the new power-up changes have not shaken up too much. I thought that these would be way more like, oh my god, we had so many new ways to play new comps. But funny enough, 2 of the power-ups actually ended up becoming nerfs for specific champions. Mecha Blade for Aatrox is actually a direct nerf to Aatrox, not because like Aatrox is just worse because this power-up exists, but because it's actually straight up just harder to find Socialite because Mecha Blade pops up way more often now. So because of this, you actually might have to cycle through your Aatrox a bit more because it's harder to find Socialite. I actually just played a game where I could not find Socialite Aatrox. I hit 9 Aatroxes throughout the game, and I didn't see Socialite once, and then at that point, it hit stage 5, and stage 5 onwards, you can't see Socialite anymore, so my game actually just got really fucked. Shine Brighter for Lux actually is also a direct nerf to Lux reroll, which is already a shitty comp, but her ability does even less damage if you pick up the hero augment now because of the way that her ability works, right? She will spread her damage into like an AoE fashion, right? So for example, she hits 2 units, she spreads her, let's say, 900 damage into 450, 450. Now, because her ability will now hit 2 hex radius instead of 1 hex radius, now it's hitting like 4 units. So instead of getting 450 per 2 units damage wise, now it's like 225, 225, 225, 225. She just spreads her damage out even more. And because she doesn't do that much damage anyways, she is just not doing anything. She just hits everybody for like a little bit, but doesn't actually kill stuff. So it's just honestly a direct nerf to Lux. But I do want to leave you guys with this, is that there are likely a bunch of lines that have yet to be discovered. The patch has very high potential to develop new lines based on the sheer size of the patch. So if you are somebody who's like not too particular about your LP, I'd actually recommend like just taking some time to just like theory craft and like work on some new stuff, because I think this is really the time where if you can find, and by the way, I'm talking to you Pawn XWX, if you can find some like new tech, this is the patch to find it. So there's definitely got some high potential to develop new lines. Again, just based on the sheer size of the changes inside of the current patch. But with that out of the way, let's now talk about all of the meta lines currently. And the first one we'll talk about is none other than Starry Night Rel. This is one of the new lines based off the hero new power-ups, if you will. Starry Night, if you don't know, for Rel is the new one where she gets more HP, and I believe it's HP and something else. I believe it's HP and Starry Night, here we go. HP and AP for every 1-cost fielded, which is doubled if they're 3-stars. So you really want to try to 3-star a bunch of 1-costs if possible. And in this line specifically, Syndra reroll tends to be like the main thing that you want to put behind in the back line. And this line, I think players were playing it at the very beginning of the patch and then quickly realized that they were not finding success. And I think because they weren't finding success, they were quick to write off this composition. But I actually think this comp has a lot of potential to be a very consistent top 4 comp, but you cannot play this in the way that you normally would play reroll lines. So what do I mean by this? Well, specifically, this reroll line is oddly enough a tempo line. It's not a line where you can sack stage 2, lose a bunch of HP, roll for your 3-stars, and then once you find them at the end of stage 3, then you can start to expect to win fights. It's the complete opposite. If anything, this line scales very poorly. So what you actually need to do is play this line from ahead when you find a bunch of Syndras and Rels early. So I mean, like, there are going to be some of those games where you find like a Syndra 2 and like a Rel 2 super early, and you can say, well, I have these units already 2-starred and my board is very strong, and you can just kind of see how the game plays out. If you can find slams and good tempo, and you're able to find the Garens and the Ezreals, and you have just a bunch of copies, that's the time to really play into this line, because you want to preserve as much HP as possible throughout the early game, because yes, despite the fact that you get the Starry Night and you can play it onto Rel, you will fall off compared to other reroll lines. The board is very difficult to cap out with, because your cap ends up being 5 Prodigy, and with the Yuumi and Leona nerfs in this current patch, the cap feels a little bit lower. You can also play around Malzahar throughout the mid game after you find your 3 stars to try and generate a little bit of that extra HP preservation. But the goal of this comp, again, is to really try and tempo as much as you can. Syndra items are kind of the same as they've always been. Voice Staff, JJ Nashor seems to be what tends to be very strong. Rel just likes general tank items. It doesn't really matter what it is, but Gargoyles is the only one that I'd like highly recommend. And then everything else is kind of up in the air. Yuumi, by the way, and even Malzahar as well, really wants to have at least one Gunblade. Rel's ability doesn't actually give her any level of shielding or healing. She only gets a bit of extra... Actually, she only does a little bit of extra damage, right? So she's just a big stat stick in the front of your team. Kind of, you can think of it as like a dumbified dummy. That's kind of what she ends up becoming. So because of that, there's no way for her to sustain throughout the fight. So getting a Gunblade somewhere on your board tends to be a really great way to help Rel survive just a little bit longer. The final tips I want to mention to you are the augments. This comp, again, because it falls off a cliff, you want to find ways to scale. So tiny team, combat augments, generally speaking, are really nice, but item augments are also going to be your best friend. There are so many units you want to itemize. Rel, Syndra, Garen likes TG a lot, but he can also take any tank items as long as you have 3 Battle Academia in, and he can also start to scale, and bonus points if you find Innovating Locket somewhere. But alongside that, you don't really want to be taking econ augments like ever in this line. You really just want to try to itemize everybody as much as you can, because you could even itemize Ezreal throughout like the early mid game if you need to, because you just have so many items that you can just like throw onto him, and he can just be a fine unit to deal a decent amount of damage. Malzahar too could also use items. Leona could use more items. Braum would like items, right? There's so many units you could just realistically itemize in this line that like you could just go ahead and just click every item augment available, and with the couple of exceptions of something like Tiny Team, really find a lot of success as you play along this line. But that's gonna do it for this line. Again, I think people are too quick to write this off. It's just such a good line. Oh, sorry, one last thing. Starry Night, the power up itself, if you look at the power up, it's only maximum stage 3. So if you find yourself like hitting a Rel 3 super early, you might be in a bit of a pinch, because sometimes what ends up happening is, in an ideal scenario, when you actually get the Starry Night, you want to hit the second power up on Starry Night for Rel, but you don't want to actually have Rel 3 just yet, because in the ideal scenario is just in case, well, the ideal scenario is you find Starry Night anyways, and it's not a problem. But in case you miss, you want to use your removers on Rel, try to find it, and then if you still don't find it after utilizing your removers, on the 8th Rel, you can use the power up on her and then sell her in case you like need to still keep shuffling, right? Starry Night is going to be significantly better than any other power up that you can get onto Rel in this line. So on 3-6 and 3-7, that's really when you want to be shuffling, and ideally you want to try to shuffle for the power up as quick as possible by just utilizing those extra 1-star copies of Rel. So it's a bit finicky. The line itself is like not amazing by any means, and again, I do view it as like a very tempo top 4 conservative line, but I still think it has a place, and I don't think it's something that people should be just writing off very quickly because they lost streak early and then they said, oh well, the line doesn't scale, therefore I don't want to play it ever again. I think people were too quick to write it off. The next one I want to talk about is going to be an experimental line. This is Ordinary Gnar. I have yet to try the line itself, so I'm not going to speak too much on this, but the idea is Ordinary, the power up got buffed. If you don't remember what that thing does, it basically just gives a bunch of attack speed to a unit that does not have, excuse me, any active traits. So it's like built different for a singular unit. So I am a firm believer that this is probably a very strong top 4 line where you want to play Gnar, reroll him with Ordinary, and you have to find Ordinary early, by the way. It has to be like your first power-up needs to be Ordinary, because the odds of finding this power-up is super low. And if you don't believe me, it is 2.3%. Where is it? 2.1%, excuse me. 2.1% to find Ordinary. Actually, 2.3% during stage 2, and I think it goes lower on stage... Oh, sorry, 2.7% on stage 3. But I would never angle this line unless I found Ordinary on 2-1, and then I would start thinking about it, but even then, it would have to be like a very, very particularly good spot. With that being said, Gnar, I believe, is the best user for Ordinary, but because the odds of finding this food are so low, I personally have yet the chance to even try to test the line. So again, it's experimental. I don't know if it's any good, but the ideal power-up for Gnar is going to be Ordinary. Ginsu Kraken GS is most likely going to be the best build for him, and you can reroll things like Aatrox and Zac as well and play 6 heavyweight in the front. You don't want to do Juggernauts because Mundo exists, and you don't want to do Bastions because Braum exists. You wouldn't be able to play any of these units anyways. So ideally speaking, you want to play around the heavyweights and play into this line. Obviously, going past level 7, you want to probably start to play around like literally anything else to flex. I think Malzahar is probably going to be the easiest unit to find, I would assume, because like he's just a 3-cost unit, right? Other flex units are going to be things like your Zyras, your TFs, right? And these are lines that generally speaking, you're not going to be able to find super early on, especially on like level 7, level 8, etc. So I'm just like not the biggest fan of like immediately recommending 5 costs, but you can literally flex whoever you want in the back. I just think Malzahar and Seraphine are going to be like the easiest attack into, but obviously things like Zyra, etc. are going to be your best out. Moving on to the next one, it's going to be Drift Duo. This is a line that I saw Robin Songs play, and it looked very promising, but there is one very large caveat. In case you do not know, Drift Duo is a new power-up for Lucian and Senna, where in this line, if you can get Lucian 3 and Senna 3 both to 3-star, then you can get +1 in the Mighty Mech trait and activating 7. So you want to somehow 3-star a 1 cost and 3-star a 3 cost. That is very difficult. So this line in particular, I would say I would not even bother considering this line unless I was in Scuttle Puddle or Crab Reef. If you are in one of those 2 portals, I think this line becomes a little bit more appealing because you need so much money in order to play into this line. And actually, when I watched Robin play this line, he played in Scuttle Puddle, and then I think he took malicious monetization in that game, but then he also took another econ augment as well. He was double econ, and yet he still went top 2, and like by the skin of his teeth barely was able, like he was so close to going first, but he just hardly missed the mark. So it's a very strong reroll line, but it requires a lot of things to go right and just a fuck ton of econ. So that is my only caveat, but it plays out like any other line. You reroll on 5, not on 4 actually, but you reroll on 5. This is at least something that was interesting that I noticed that Robin did, but he likes to roll on 5 specifically because you also want to have just those increased odds to find the other units as well. In his game particularly, he had Lucian, Senna, Aatrox, and Gangplank all 3-starred. But that doesn't have to be the case. You could skip the Gangplank if necessary. You can even skip the Aatrox if necessary. But realistically, you want to roll for Lucian 3 plus like Aatrox or GP or like something just to help fortify your front line, and then push levels to 7 and then roll on 7 to try to find the Sennas. Rolling on 5 helps you find those increased odds of finding Senna as well as you're rolling for Lucian. That probably is what I believe is the best way to approach the line. But personally speaking, I've also failed the one time I got to play this line, so I might not be giving the best advice here, but all I do know for a fact is that you want a bunch of econ. A really cool way, by the way, I noticed is that the way you cap out this line that I think it deserves notice is eventually when you find the Lucian 3 and the Senna 3 and you have Mighty Mech in, you're able to tempo a lot. The board itself is actually very, very strong, but as the game progresses, as you keep pushing your levels, eventually you will find the Yone, and Yone does fit very well into this board for very obvious reason. So once you get to the Yone, then what? Because now you're 8 out of 7 mech. Well, what I've noticed is what I think the general consensus is you actually take the Drift Duo power up off of Lucian, and then you put a different power up on specifically Mech Pilot. And Mech Pilot could actually do a lot of work for you because you have this 7 Mighty Mech, which is going to be so strong, and you can use it on something like Karma, or you can use it on Lucian, or even Senna if they fix the Executioner bug, which I don't think they did, but you could do it on any of these, even GP if necessary, right? If you have Duelist active, if you have the Udyr into the board, which I think is very strong. It's like the most common one, I think, but you can also do Ryze if you want the Executioner buff for Senna, also with Strategist. These are also fine as well, like it depends on who you want to flex into. But regardless, you can mech pilot one of these units and then really buff the crap out of your robot, and then that's how you really cap out. So really cool and interesting line, but again, requires so much economy that like I would like highly advise against playing this line unless like it's Scuttle or Crab Rave, and or like just you have some way to get a fuck ton of money generated onto your line. The next one cost reroll line I want to talk about is going to be Kayle reroll. I think Kayle has definitely come back as a line that is definitely viable with the Wraith buffs. Except before, when you used to play 6 Juggernaut, now I actually think you want to play into the Wraiths a little bit more. I think Zac 3 is a very, very strong unit that I think people are kind of sleeping on. And I think with Kayle, you actually can find quite a lot of success, like once you get to the Kayle 3 Zac 3, to just start pushing your tempo and then just try to generate both econ with things like Golden Edge for your power up or Midas if necessary, right? And then eventually scale to the point where you get to level 9 and you can play into the Varus, the Jhin, 6 Wraith, and really cap out there. Another thing to note as well is that the K'Sante 2 is like very important actually in the late game, because when you get to the late game, Zac 3 alone is not going to be enough. I'm sure that's fairly obvious looking at the board itself. You really do want to cap out and try to get some units onto your board here to really fortify your front line. The lack of front line is the big problem that you'll find yourself when playing this line. One thing to note though is that Aatrox as well is going to be your power up holder for Socialite, and Kayle is obviously going to be things like your Surge or your Ramping Rage. I think Ramping Rage is going to be the best one out of all of them. Double Strike is fine as well. But Aatrox Socialite is going to be a good way to just really bump as much power as you can into the board itself. I put the Darkness Within augment here specifically because I don't think that this augment is on anybody's radar at the moment, because I think the augment itself is understandably kind of mid. The spawns that come out don't have that much HP from the looks of it, and generally I do think that from the early game it's very difficult to justify this augment. But sometimes you take Gold Destiny and then you get the Darkness Within and you're like, well, now what? Well, Kayle actually does pretty well. And actually I think this augment is a little bit better in Kayle specifically because this line in particular lacks frontline, and this augment, whoa crap, English, this augment is very good at fortifying your front line, and as the game progresses, the little shitters that it summons actually do scale quite a bit. I did have a game earlier where I got to play the Darkness with plot armor, and I did have a question, and if anybody can answer this question, I would love for you to answer this. But does the spawns from the Darkness Within apply things like plot armor or second or last second save, but second win or like last second save, right? Augments like these, like, do these actually scale with the little underlings themselves? And if you find any sort of evidence that can confirm or deny this, I'd love to hear it. Again, you can't right click on the little shitters, so that's the only part that really made it hard for me to confirm or deny whether or not it felt good. But I can tell you that when I had these two augments, plot armor and the Darkness Within, it felt very, very good. So that is what I want to leave you with. But again, Kayle is super, super strong. And I think, honestly, if you wanted to play the Juggernaut version, I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. And I think, actually, for most people's default, playing the Juggernaut variation is going to be totally okay and going to be what they roll with. And that's fine, too. I think it's a lot more stable throughout the mid-game, which is why I think it's a bit more appealing. But I do think Zac 3 is enough to get you by, enough that you can eventually get to 9 and cap out with 6 Wraith. But obviously, you can't find the Varus or the K'Sante, because K'Sante is very highly contested. Understandably, the Juggernaut version is going to be a lot easier to find all of your key units, like your sets, your Lee Sins to cap out with, right? Like, I can understand, like, potato, but I think both are very viable, and 6 Wraith does look a little bit slightly better in the stats and lets you play things like the Darkness Within. But overall, that's basically going to do it. Kayle's build, Ginsu GS and JG, is going to be like the main way to build it. I didn't mention this in the overall meta overview, but GS is such a good item now. Like, it's generally one of the best items that you can build. So GS is going to be better than Strikers, but obviously if you have JG, Strikers, Ginsu, totally fine as well, and that's perfectly okay. The final one cost reroll I want to talk about, but not spend too much time on, is going to be Jhin Crew. This is, again, still one of the strongest meta reroll lines at the moment. It's very consistent, very easy to top 4 with. You just have to make sure that once you get to Jhin 3 and Sivir 3, you are able to push levels and get to that Jinx 2 or Varus or whoever it may be, just to fortify your secondary carry and cap out from there. The line, I will say, though, feels a little bit better than it used to, because despite the fact that Malphite did get some pretty heavy nerfs, Sivir 3 actually feels pretty decent. So now in like the mid game, when you are on Jhin 3, Malphite 3, and Sivir 3, but you're trying to get to 8 and find your Jinx 2 or your Varus 2 to try and stabilize because you need that secondary carry, Sivir 3 is pumping out enough that you feel a little bit better than you did before throughout that mid game. But again, the early game feels a little bit worse. Line's very straightforward. Again, it's Spirit Sword, Artistic KO, or Double Strike for your Jhin. It really depends on your build and setup. I think my general rule of thumb is that if you want to go Spirit Sword, you are exactly on the dot 100% crit, because you're not wasting that 20% crit that the Spirit Sword power-up gives you, because, you know, exactly 100% good. So that means what? Like IE plus a crit item plus spirit sword. That should put you at 100% because 20, 40, 75. Yeah, there you go. Another thing to note is that artistic KO is going to be better when you have things like your death blade, right? Because that's going to really be helping you one-shotting units to really make sure you get that overkill damage to spread around across the board. Double strike, I also think, is also very, very good if you don't exactly have a death blade in your build, but you also have like way too much crit. Like, for example, things like radiant IE already puts you at 100% because the base gives you 75 plus the 25 that you have originally on your units, because every unit has base 25% crit. That being said, if you have like an Radiant IE plus Strikers plus Last Whisper, that's way too much crit. So like if you put Spirit Sword on top of that, it's just you're wasting so much stats. So in a spot like that, I actually prefer something like Double Strike instead. And I've even seen some takes that like Double Strike is just straight up better than Artistic KO. So it's still very up in the air. I think it's based on personal preference, but I think very depending on your build, you should really be dynamic about the way you choose your jins, fruit, and determining what exactly is best, right? There are also other instances as well where if your opponents, and actually because it's a reroll meta, have very tanky frontliners, right? Because nowadays we're seeing a bunch of like 3-star Rakans and like 3-star whoever it may be, like I don't know, Mundo, right? A bunch of stuff in the I don't see 3-star Mundo that often except for the reroll line. We'll get to that. But regardless though, when you're playing around these like beefy frontliners, then Jhin is going to have a harder time getting that overkill damage. So at the very least, in those scenarios, Artistic KO is going to be a lot worse, right? Compared to Double Strike or compared to Spirit Sword. So that's just something to keep in mind. I do think his power up is very, very flexible, but you have to be very critical about the way you approach selecting which one to take. Okay, moving on to the 2 costs. The first one to talk about is going to be Mentor Katarina, which I think a lot of people give a lot of flack to this line. I think this line is very, very good. Again, a new line that has come out due to the power-up changes and shifts, but it's a very strong line and very consistent, but does require a lot of positioning knowledge to do well with. Another thing is that Veteran is required on Katarina, and it's one of those power-ups that is good later you get it, not earlier you get it. Like if you get it early on, you're gonna have to take it because the odds of it finding it is not too high, but it's still a very solid, like, decent stat stick for your board, and it's good enough, right? But generally, the ideal game plan is you play the Katarina early, you find it, and you have good item slams already. Things like your Hodge, your Edge of Night, or your Nashers. You're already like, I could start building towards my Katarina items already, straight from the get-go 2-1. If that's the case, then you can literally take any power-up of Katarina. It does not really matter. It's like Blink Attack. Well, if it's good, right? Blink Attack, Dark Amulet, even Crimson Veil, right? These are things that you could take in the early game. And then eventually, once you actually get to a point where you could justify having 4 Mentor onto your board, whether that's because you found the Udyr and the Kabuko and the Yasuo, or even better, a Ryze, then at that point, you could switch your power-up route and try to fish for Veteran instead for Katarina. If that's the case, then you can actually play the 4 Mentor variation here, which you'll find is roll on 6, and you look for Kabuko 3 and Katarina 3. I have Rakan 3 start here as well, but I think generally speaking, it's just not as good compared to getting the Kabuko instead. Kabuko 3 with 4 Mentor is such a beast, and actually with this setup as well, I would honestly recommend, instead of going for tank items, which you obviously could use tank items on Kabuko, is totally acceptable and probably the meta way to go. He really likes items like Sterax, items like IE even, and like trying to build him with like more of like a AD bruiser slash like AD caster build almost. He does a lot of damage, and actually like Warmogs is his best item, so like obviously Warmogs here as well, but his itemization is actually quite fluid, and you shouldn't feel too bad about slamming things like Sterax onto him. And actually IE is probably like a little over ambitious, but like Sterax, Warmogs, these are items that he really likes because he does so much damage when he has his 4 Mentor activated. So he actually kind of works as a very interesting secondary carry, which obviously you could just eventually get to the Ryze as well in the backline, but Kabuko 3 is not to be slept on by any means. For your power-ups for your secondary, it's actually going to be Jace specifically, because Jace is easy to roll through because you don't care about Jace 3, you just care about having a Jace, and because obviously it gives you heavyweight and Battle Academia, but he can also roll Socialite, and that way you can really abuse Socialite here and get a lot of value out of it. The comp itself caps pretty high, even higher if you can find artifacts, and as you keep going through the game itself, you can eventually cap out with Lee Sin, with Executioner Lee Sin here, and just keep building into the executioners as necessary. Maybe even the strategist, if you find some strategist like rationale, like if you find like the Jarvan, like I guess that's okay. But usually you want to get to Lee Sin and try to itemize him as well for your end game out. Again, very cool line. It is, I will say though, bugged, unfortunately. I believe I saw Kim on Twitter say, he's an analyst, by the way, on like I believe for an Asian team. He works closely with YBY1, but he was like, I think he said specifically it was like 4% odds for the augment or the power up the bug, where instead of getting 4 mentor, you only end up getting 3. I can't confirm or deny if that's the case, but that is something to be like slightly aware of. So despite that, I think this line is very, very good. It does have its caveats, and it is a very niche line. I don't think it's a line you can play too often by any means, but still very, very strong. And obviously I think this is the best too much value board by far. You just automatically slot in 4 very easily, and you just get a lot of value. Moving on is going to be the Shen Hero Augment. This is probably the most straightforward line we'll talk about today. Ginsu GS Gunblade on Shen. Could be Kraken instead of a Gunblade, that's fine. You just roll on 6 for Shen 3, Shin Zhao 3, play vertical bastions. This on screen is the level 7 board. If you can't find the Leona super early on, then you'll play like 4 Edgelord and like 4 Bastion until you get to that Leona. But you do want to default that 6 Bastion if possible. This line, by the way, gets severely awkward on level 8. You really just flex like anything and just hope it's good enough. I personally still to this day have no idea what the level 8 flex is going to be. It's really whatever you want here, and just so be it, and just throw in whatever. You could also, by the way, if you find a lot of Shens just like naturally very early on, you could just opt to roll on 7 instead for this board, and then look for like Swain 3, Yasuo 3 potentially, as well, alongside the Shin Zhao and the Shen. I think this is like a higher capped variation, but it is difficult to find Yasuo, because as we'll talk about later, Xayah Rakan is going to be really like gunning for those Yasuos as well in the perfect scenario. So it can be difficult to find the Yasuo 3 to try to cap out with. You can also do things like Volibear. This is okay as well. I think this is totally fine. And if you wanted to, because you have now the mentors open, put in any mentor for your board and it's probably okay, right? Your Udyrs, your Kabukos, whatever it may be. That could be a flex if you just can't find anything like Zyra for your level 8 board. But very, very straightforward. Shin Zhao 3 is going to be your main tank. And that's all there is to it. Very, very straightforward and very strong. Solid A tier board in my opinion. Now, on to the topic of Xayah Rakan. Is Xayah Rakan the S tier 2-cost reroll line by far? Really prefers to have BIS for Rakan. Xayah also really has some like ideal items she wants to be having. So like Rakan specifically really likes Gargoyles, Titans, Archangels. This specific build is super nice because Rakan gets so much healing because of his heal scaling off of AP, and Gargoyles just letting him tank so much because you want the resistances, and Titans, which obviously, just as we saw with Colossal Udyr, gives him CC immunity and a bunch of stats once he's able to tank quite a lot and get to that full stacks. Xayah also really wants Ginsu Kraken +1. GS is fine. I've seen Last Whisper on her. If you can't find the Sunder, that's okay too. But generally, this is your bread and butter. It is a very strong line and is just severely accelerated by having BIS. And I will say that this line, I think, is being overplayed. I really do think that like you want good slams and good items for Rakan, and then the Xayah items can be a little bit more flexible, right? Like, yes, Ginsu Kraken is ideal, but you can also get away with a lot of other AD items. It doesn't necessarily have to be Ginsu Kraken GS specifically. It could be like Ginsu's +2, does not matter. DB and like a GS or an IE or Last Whisper, totally fine as well. Rakan though really wants Archangels, and like honestly, I'm kind of stuck between Gargoyles or Titans. I think intuitively I want to say Gargoyles is a little bit more important because you want those resistances somewhere. If you can't get the Gargoyles but get the Titans instead, that's fine. But then you really want something like Thornmail or like Dragon's Claw instead for your third item, because you just want to make sure that you have some level of resistances in there for Rakan to actually be tanky in the first place. Because if he's not tanky in the first place, doesn't matter how much you heal. If you blow up like a balloon, so be it. Like you're just gonna get popped. Ooh, a lot of motifs there. Anyways, Nico is also really nice to have as well. Not necessary by any means. And Yasuo, again, ideally you find him 3-starred, but it's very uncommon. Instead, you could just find things like your Volibears or your Zamiras to work as a secondary carry, and that works fine as well. Janna, by the way, does not have to be 3-starred at all, but it's nice to have. She's really good at just being your general utility holder, things like your Morello. She's easily like the best holder, I think. But if you really wanted to, and if you're like, I must 3-item my units no matter what, that's okay. You can just do things like Sunfire plus Even Shroud on Nico and then call it there. Although this is just a little bit it's a little bit more dubious to say the least compared to having just like last whisper on Xayah or like Morello on Janna. This is just way safer and more consistent compared to doing something like this, unless of course you have the Nico 3-star. Tiny Team is obviously going to be the best augment by far in this line. It's not even close. But honestly, very straightforward comp. Very easy and very great. And actually, I would honestly make the argument that I think Pandora's items is also super strong because you do really want to try to guarantee BIS if possible. I don't know if Pandora's 2-1 is like an immediate Rakan Xayah force, but I could see it for sure. Next one for the 2 cost Reroll line we're going to talk about is going to be Kaisa. Kaisa, not much has changed at all, if anything at all. I think this line is just super straightforward, easy to play. You could do Socialite on Aatrox. I think I've seen Volta, who is a very strong rank 1 EOS player who's gone to Worlds multiple times. I've seen him do Socialite Aatrox plus Bullet Hell Kaisa. That seems to be his preferred power-ups. I've heard people also really like powering up Rammus to have Unstoppable on him, which is totally fine as well because his ability actually taunts enemies to attack him specifically. So by having Unstoppable on him as well, he really gets to maximize things like Gargoyles to just be this beefy, just annoying tank in the front line. Darius 3 is going to be the ideal duo carry as well, but unfortunately, because of Malzahar reroll, Darius actually becomes very difficult and contested to find. So I wouldn't rely on finding Darius too often, but Kaisa and Rammus are going to be much easier to find compared to other units, because these units are like, I think, not a priority in any other line. So that is something that you can consider. But again, very straightforward. Kaisa's build, I will say, has changed a little bit with the item changes. I think IE Strikers Nashers is going to be her highest cap best build. Blue buff is also very, very good on her as well. But with the changes to Nashor's Tooth, I do think it works just as well, if not easier to find than blue buff. But obviously, blue buff is a great way to kill tiers. So I don't think there's too much of a difference between the two, to be completely honest, but I do like Nash's just a little bit more. That's just my personal preference. It's especially nice because with Kaisa's passive, she actually stacks so much AD already. So this like full crit build actually just feels like a lot of value. But if you have like DB instead, then blue buff would be better because of the way that the new blue buff works, but you get the idea. So very cool, solid line. Nothing much more to really add, just same as it's always been. Next one on the 2 cost reroll side is going to be Mundo Reroll. This is the premier. I don't know why I use the word premier. It's the only Mundo Hero reroll line. Excuse me. Give him the chair. Very strong. It got turbo buffed in the current patch. So now you're seeing this. I think it's honestly just hard forceable. If you get the augment 2-1, you just play the line. Because Juggernauts are just not the premier frontline anymore. You really do see Mundo and just all the Juggernauts really being free to grab. So very easy line to play. You just roll for Mundo 3 on 6. You can go for Vi 3 as well if you want to. It's perfectly fine. She did get buffed in this current patch. I just don't know if she's a better tank than things like your set 2, but totally fine as well. You can go for Ginsu's IE plus GS or Strikers. I think both are totally fine. And you just tech in a Luchador on level 7. Super straightforward, super easy. Play 6 jugs, it fries in the bag. Very easy. And it actually, honestly, level 9 is just Gnar and like Volibear. And then you just put in Volibear as like your secondary, or like Volibear 2 and like itemize him as your secondary. That's okay as well. This is like your ideal cap. Super straightforward. Really not much else that needs to be said. There, like it's yeah, I mean, that's the board. Finally, knuckleduster Vi. Really, really strong line as well. I will say that it's probably slightly worse if you are playing in a lobby where someone's going to give him the chair. It's actually probably severely worse because you're gonna have a much harder time finding your units. But it's still very, very strong, and it still has been finding a lot of success in the current meta. I do think the backline is super flexible. If there's a crew player in your lobby, forget the Jhin. Just play around Smolder or Kog'Maw or just whoever in your back is totally okay. Ashe works as well. That's totally fine. Like, you can do whatever in the backline. It does not really matter. Vi is just going to garner you so much tempo that you really have the liberty to choose whoever you want in the backline. Itemization wise, IE, Hodge, and Edge of Night is going to be your best bet. And then backline carry items, literally again, whatever. Very straightforward. Roll on 6. Moving on. Going on to the 3 costs, the premier and strongest. I feel like I've been using the word premier a lot. I don't know if it's because I started drinking Corona again recently, but Malzahar 3. So strong. Easily the strongest reroll line at the moment. It's on everybody's radar right now because Malzahar 1 and Malzahar 2 are so fucking stable. And because they're so stable, you preserve so much HP playing this reroll line despite the fact that it might take you a bit of time to get to the 3-star. This is also the most #1 contested line by far in the current meta. Xayah Rakat might be even more contested. It's really up there, but this is easily just all the units are so contested. Malzahar's unit quality is so high. Darius is contested with like Kaisa reroll lines. So this line, despite being very strong, it can be hard to get to because if you're not very diligent in the way that you scout and be very cautious of other players who might be rerolling similar units that you are, it can be a very difficult time to find everything. Malzahar 3, Darius 3 are going to be your main carries. It's a roll on 7. Start rolling on 4-1, level 7 ideally. And you look for things like Blue Buff, Void Staff, and Rabadons for Malzahar. His items are honestly super flexible. Just slam whatever. It does not matter. It's the general rule of thumb is you want Void Staff, you want to manage an item, and you want some sort of stat stick. That's all there is to it. Malzahar's best power up, by the way, is going to be Shadow Clone. It's not even close. The reason being is because his Shadow Clone actually helps proc his ability a little bit more and spreads the infection out faster so that you can start stacking the infections on top of each other to really start clearing and wiping out boards. There is some discussion that Mage Malzahar might also be very strong, and it would be, except for one problem where the Mage power-up is bugged, where on his second cast, I'm trying to remember the exact rationale, but I believe on his second cast from Mage, what ends up happening is that he autos in between the first and second cast, but because he's mana locked, he loses that one auto of mana gen. And because of that, it's a lot weaker. I think that's how it works. I could be wrong, but I think that's what I've heard. So generally, don't take Mage. It's not good. It's bugged. You want to take Shadow Clone instead whenever possible. Fairy Tail, I've seen some level of success because you do actually cast quite a lot, but compared to Shadow Clone, it's just not even a competition. So you really do want to get Shadow Clone if possible. This is, again, another Socialite Aatrox line. Despite, yes, it did get nerfed, Socialite is still so strong. So you're going to Socialite the board like 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is just going to be the way to go. Darius 3 is also obviously your ideal secondary carry, and people have been trying to 3-star Jace when playing this line. Stop doing it. It's not good. It's a waste of money, and most of the time, you can't even itemize this guy. So the only time you want to 3-star Jace, if ever, is if you find Fusion Dance. There are going to be times that because Mecha Blade Aatrox is now a thing, you just miss Socialite. I have played games where I just straight up miss Socialite entirely despite recycling copies and using all my removers. It will happen if you're like me. So if it does happen, your next best bet is to use Fusion Dance on Darius. And if that's the case, then you may want to consider looking for 3-star Jace if you happen to have a lot of copies, because Jace 3 is going to be the best thing to eat for Darius to get really strong for Fusion Dance. That is the only time I would ever really consider 3-starring Jace, but otherwise, you want to try to hit Socialite Aatrox, and as long as you're someone like Wei Iverson, you cannot miss. That being said, that is kind of all there is to this line. Again, super straightforward, but I will say, this line is very fast lineable. Like I've said multiple times now, Malzahar 2 is super strong. And if you're playing this line and you notice you're contested, push your levels. It is totally okay. And actually, the level 8, is it the level 8 version of this board? No, excuse me, sorry, that's if you have the +1. But the level 9 version of this board is very strong, and it's very easy to get there because the board itself, if you look at it, and excuse me while I do this real quick. Do you notice something here? This is cheap as fuck. It is so cheap to have a almost, if not fully upgraded board on level 8, and then just push your levels to 9. It is so easy. So this board, if you find yourself contested, don't panic. Just push your levels, push your lead, and ideally preserve your HP as much as you can, because you can either eventually find all the Malzahars later down the line, or just go for like a super high cap. You can just play this board, right? You just play the six heavyweights, and then eventually just cap out with things like either 4 Wraith, because you find the Varus and you have good Varus items. You could do Varus Jhin. You could do things like Seraphine Zyra. Get the Prodigy plus Star Guardian in, and then Zyra just flexes in on 9. Super strong as well. And actually Zyra as a backline unit, just, I would argue, very strong. Like, I actually think you can itemize Zyra and just feel very good about it. So, like, backline plant Zyra is just, like, super slept on. Like, definitely just play into it. I think it's totally okay. Like this, if this is your level 9 board, easily top 4able. Very top 4able as long as you preserve your HP. Definitely something to consider. But moving on, next up is going to be Viego Reroll. This line was seeing some level of play in the last patch, but compared to now, it is much, much better. I do think, though, that people are playing this line a little bit not as well as they could. And the reason I say that is this. I think this line requires Viego 3 and Xin Zhao 3. And ideally, in a perfect world, you also find the Lux. It's not necessary, but there are ways to play and navigate around this line that I don't think people have really caught on to yet. If you remember, back in set... Was it set 14? Syndicate? I think it was. Syndicate Reroll. I can't believe I can't even remember at this point. TF Reroll with Syndicate, back in set 14, I believe, was a line that you would play from a high tempo spot and eventually try to top 4 with it, right? And the general game plan, in case you forgot, it's all mental, get ready. You roll for TF2, Darius 2, who were both 2 costs, on level 6, push your tempo, then on level 7, you try to find the Draven 2, and then you try to roll on 7 on 4-1 until stage 5, where you find the entirety of the board, then where you roll down all your money to find Draven 3, who's a 3 cost, TF 3, who's a 2 cost, and Darius 3, who's a 2 cost. That was the general game plan, right? I hope you followed me on that one. The reason why I bring it up is this. In this line, you could treat this line very similarly to TF Reroll from back in set 14, where you could utilize Lux to actually just tempo you throughout the early and mid game, and then find the Viego 2 on 4-1, and then start to play around the Viego instead. So your Lux isn't necessarily holding Lux items, she's holding Viego items, and until you find that Viego, then you can transfer over and start playing around the Viego instead with Soul Fighters. So I do think that this line has a lot more potential with Lux openers. I think people just don't realize that if you have a Lux opener, that is a Viego opener. It's not actually a Lux opener, because Lux Reroll herself is just not that good. But if you have like a Gintu Slam on 2-1 with like a Lux 2, that should be in your head clocking it as a Viego line. That is not a Lux spot by any means. So I really do think that this is like a level 7 4-1 roll on 7, yada yada yada. But you have to preserve your HP a bit more in the early game, and there are ways to get there that aren't necessarily as straightforward as before. So I do think that this line is very, very strong because you get to preserve so much HP, because Soul Fighter units, especially units like the Fury, are just so strong. And obviously, just to be clear, the Fury 2-2-1, she can hold Viego items perfectly fine. You don't have to do the whole Luxian Zhao waltz, if you will. You can just do this and just tempo with Soul Fighters and then play around the Viego, or just play Soul Fighters standard in the vertical, and that's totally okay. So again, very good line, super great. Viego items are going to be Ginsu's, Edge Knight, and GS. Ideally, you do want stretchy arms on this guy, and Xin Zhao can take any power up, really. I personally really like Corrosive. That's just my personal bread and butter, but I've heard people like Colossal. I think that's totally fine as well. The only problem though with Colossal is that if you do find that Gwen or that extra emblem, it's a lot harder to fit in Soul Fighter 8 if you do end up going Colossal. So that's just something to keep in mind. You do just want to play as many Soul Fighters as possible, because the ideal cap is just 8 Soul Fighter. That's just the only thing to it. Again, Lux 3, not super necessary. Totally fine if you find it, don't need it, but nice little bonus to have as well. But I think that's basically gonna do it. Oh, sorry, Portable Forge, one last thing. Viego loves artifacts, like severely loves artifacts. Wit's End, Sniper's Focus, RFC, all are fantastic on him. I even think he likes potentially Lichbane, and he likes Sonya's as well. There's so many. So I highly recommend just like trying to play into the Viego, and if you find Portable Forge and you find anything that works for him. I think even Flicker Blade is good on him too. So definitely a great line to keep in mind. Finally, let's go over these standard lines. This is probably the most controversial part of the video, if you will. So bear with me if you don't understand or agree with my takes. I don't know how I said understand. You can clearly understand me. I'm speaking in English. Maybe you don't speak English. But if you don't agree with my takes here, that's totally fine. I'm just here talking on my soapbox on my channel. But first off, Bastion Flex. I think 6 Bastion Flex is severely underplayed, and it's not being played correctly. Bastion Flex is a fast 9 comp. It's not a composition that you can play and then you tempo to level 8 and then you roll all your money on 4-1 or 4-2 trying to find units. It's not the way you play this line. And actually, if you look at the stats of this line, it is fucking horrendous, right? If you exclude all of the 3-star lines that like actually utilize Bastions, 5.1 is horrendous. It is terrible. I get it. What you don't understand though is that, again, it is because players are not playing the line right. It is a fast 9 line. Your idea about playing around this line should be you have some very strong just carry that can tempo you throughout the early game, plus bastion frontline, like your updated Garen and your upgraded Rel. That plus like any sort of like upgraded backliner, that's a tempo bastion line. How do you navigate the line though? So you just push tempo, right? Level 6 on 3-1, maybe 3-2, depends on how much your economy is looking or whether or not you actually need it, right? You want to try and ultimately aim for a 10 streak. That is your ultimate goal of 10 win streak. So whatever you got to do to succeed while playing this line, that is what you got to try to aim for, obviously, while being rational while doing it. The goal of this line is to find some flexibility on your level 8 to then just go straight to 9 and then just pivot right into the legendaries. So you can play things like Jinx, you can play things like Samira, you can play things like Yuumi, Volibear, Malzahar too. These are all viable units that you can utilize, and actually there's probably even more in like the 3 cost area that I'm just not even sure of myself yet, but these are all very viable units that you can utilize throughout the early to mid game, or rather mid to late game, that will get you throughout stage 4 and into stage 5, where eventually you stop bleeding, but because you preserve so much HP and so much tempo that you got to 9 to play around the legendaries. Things like your Zyra, things like your TF, your Varus, your Seraphine, your Brahms. There are so many units that can be utilized that you can slam AP items, AD caster items, AD attack speed items, AD melee items. All of these work because you have units like Braum, Zyra, Varus, TF, whoever it may be, to just utilize these items in the end game. So 6 Bastion, don't overstay your time on level 8. Find something that's stable enough to get you to 9 comfortably, and then cap out with things like TF, Varus, Zyra, Seraphine, whoever it may be. Very strong tempo line, but requires a very specific spot and no lose streaking. You really want to avoid lose streaking. If you're trying to lose streak into fast 9 this patch, it is going to be a disaster. So just make sure that if you're playing into this line, you have high HP, high preservation, and slamming everything that comes your way and making sure that your slams are making sense. Really good line though. Not like just easily such a good line. And even you might have noticed there's a meta line that's like hiding in here, but Bastion Volibear is also in here as well. So just something to keep in mind. Very cool stuff to use, but it's definitely not being played correctly in the current patch. The next one I'm gonna talk about is going to be Jinx Flex. Jinx Flex is very hard. This is, I would argue, the hardest line in the entire meta. So if you really want to be a Giga Sweat and climb a bunch of LP by like playing high tempo only and playing Jinx Flex only, it might be possible, but I mean, not every game you're gonna have a tempo spot, right? But if every time you have a tempo spot, you're like, I'm playing Jinx Flex this game because I'm a sweaty guy, then it's gonna be hard. This is your core: Jinx, Poppy, Cassandre, Neeko, Zac. These 5 units are your key ingredients. You want to make sure that you have these units to play around, and you want to upgrade either Poppy or Cassandre plus Jinx too. That is your ideal 4-2 scenario. Everything else on the side though, if it does get upgraded, that can also work. So what do I mean by that, right? Let's say you're playing around this core. First off, the Luchador clusters. If you find like Volley 2, Cassandre 2, that's enough. Play around this sort of stuff instead. Jinx 1, that's fine, you can hold utility, but play around this to get yourself to 9. Again, just like the 6 Bastion comp, this comp is also a flex on level 8. Be very conservative, but be smart about your econ to find upgraded 4 costs and flex those in to get to 9. Volibear 2, Cassandre 2, or Volibear 2, Poppy 2, right? Jinx 2, Cassandre 2, that works too. Like, and Volibear 1, that's fine. Like, throw these in, that makes perfect sense. If you find a Braum instead, then what you could do is flex in the Rel, flex in the Gnar, and flex in the Braum. That's totally okay. And then if you take out these, guess what? Oh my god, it's also perfect. So there's a bunch of different units that you can utilize and hold, but it's very difficult to play into. Other clusters as well include the Wraith stuff. This is probably the most common one that you'll see a lot of people making guides on, but things like Malzahar 2 plus Jinx plus Poppy. That's a very common way to get yourself to 9. Find the Varus early on, then you can do Varus Jhin instead. That is okay as well. So much ways to play into this line, and it's so interesting. And I still think that this line is probably the most interesting and most intricate and most flexible, but there are so many different ways to play into it that it's very difficult to navigate and pilot. The hardest part about this line is making sure your pivot isn't sloppy, that you are, if you are pivoting into this line or playing and pivoting and flexing, that you are finding the units that you need fast, upgraded, so that you can get to 9 without spending too much money. Another cluster as well, which I can't speak too much on, I've heard of though, is like this 4 heavyweight 3 academia cluster, which is like, again, like Poppy 2, like Jinx, and like a Jace 2 with like 80 melee items. I can't really speak on this one. In case you didn't notice, you dropped the Nico for Rakan. I can't speak too much on this line. I think it's kind of mid compared to the other ones, but it's also there and available if you want to play into this cluster as well. So again, a lot of different ways to play into this line, but I do think that this line in particular is super hard. So if you play this line, good luck. That's all I gotta say to you. Next one, the easiest of the meta forecast lines, or at least one of the easiest, is going to be just vertical soul fighter. Very strong, very easy to play. Tempo with soul fighters in the early game. You play into your Samira, and you look for like Shadow Clone Samira, or you look for like whatever power-ups. It really doesn't matter. Just something for Set, something for Samira. It's really straightforward. And you could get away with a lot of stuff. Sky Piercer Samira is probably fine as well. You could get away with Gwen power-ups once you find the Gwen 2, right? Very straightforward, very easy. Not much to really say. I do think the God's Eye Open augment is pretty strong if you can get a free Nefiri 2 and a Callista 2 out of it. Because if you can find those 2 upgraded units, then tempoing with Soul Fighters is honestly very straightforward. So, very easy line, very fun to play. Honestly, not much else to really add. I mean, Samira items are like your IE, your strikers. It could be blue buff, it could be Nashers. I think these are all perfectly acceptable as well. I can't seem to find any of these items as I speak about them, but that's totally fine. Set can hold your even shroud. Viego items are nice. He loves holding TG. That's just a very easy way to itemize this guy and get a lot of value out of him. But yeah, very straightforward. Not much else to really add. Another really straightforward line as well is going to be your mentor mech. This is the Ryze line that has not seen any sort of difference at all in terms of the way that you approach it. It's gonna be your probably standard AP meta line default. You just play around the Ryze 2 items, and you can itemize Senna as well. She's just very good at holding things. But Yasuo also really likes holding items as well, and it's probably gonna be like your main 80 item holder whenever possible, because 1, he just does a lot of damage, but then 2, he can also transfer his items onto Lee Sin to cap out even higher with Lee Sin 2 with Executioners. Aatrox is going to be holding Socialite as well. Again, it's a Socialite abuse line. This was actually, funny enough, the strongest meta line at the end of the last patch, because people found out that Socialite Aatrox was just so fucking broken. And because of that, now Socialite, despite being nerfed, it's still very, very strong and still one of the most meta forecast lines. And you shouldn't shy away from this line. It's just very, very strong. Void Staff, Strikers, Rabadons is going to be your main line for in terms of itemization. This is probably true best in slots. Archangels used to be, but now it's no longer the best after the nerfs. Rabadons is definitely going to be the way to go. Finally, I believe Colossal Udyr is the last one on the list. Is it the last one on the list? It is. Colossal Udyr is the last comp we're going to be talking about today. Thank goodness, this is quite a long video. But Ashe is still very, very strong. This is definitely a Pandora's item check, because Udyr definitely needs full true best in slot, but this line is super, super strong. Some people have tried experimenting with this line by playing Aatrox instead of Set, and then using Socialite plus Colossal Udyr, and then trying to find success that way. The stats don't like it very much though. So they actually still prefer having a Set on your board instead, which is pretty understandable. Like, Aatrox is just not a unit like by himself, and Set at least provides Soul Fighter for Viego, who is actually quite a strong unit, especially with Soul Fighter active. So I would say that generally speaking, you are better off playing this variation instead. Pandora's items just get True Best onto Udyr, Ginsu Kraken, Edge of Night for Ashe. Nothing has changed in that ballpark, but still, the stats really support it. And actually, hold on, let me just exclude Viego 3 real quick. Let me just make sure I'm not talking out of my ass when I talk about the Set stuff. But I'm fairly certain Aatrox is here. It's a little positive, and Set's actually worse. Okay, so I'm talking out of my ass. I gotta update this one. So actually, Aatrox is gonna be better here, and it seems like Socialite is gonna be the way to go. You play Aatrox instead of Set for Socialite, assuming you have Viego 2. If you have Viego 3 though, then Set is gonna be better. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. Glad I checked that out at the very last minute of the video. I will say the rationale behind that too is, like, if you're like, why not just like power up the Ashe? It's because Ashe's power-ups are just not necessarily that good. Her best one is going to be Sky Piercer of all things, if you don't have Sunder though. And then if you do have Sunder, then it's like, then what? So Bullet Hell, Shadow Clone, these are all things you could do, even Double Strike. But the reality is that the Socialite is just such a broken power up, then you're just probably better off just buffing the entirety of your board with social light rather than just a singular unit. But that is going to do it for today's video. I hope this was all helpful. If you have any questions or any different takes on the current meta or the current state of the patch, I'd love to hear it. But that's going to do it for everything here. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Take care, guys. Happy clubbing.